2020 census is coming up, and so we are trying to get everyone's attention to the fact that the census is coming up and how important it is and what's new this time around, okay? So we're starting with the fact that the census itself is mandated by the United States Constitution. The first census was done in 1790, so this is the 24th decennial census, decennial meaning it's done every 10 years. Most people think of it as being responsible for how the 435 seats of the House of Representatives are distributed. That's one of its uses. But it also has a say in how our 17 county legislative districts are divided up and how our local assembly, Senate districts, and many, many other districts around the county are also divided up. More importantly, particularly for local municipalities, the census data is used for the distribution of about $880 billion a year of federal programs across all of the country. In fact, the Census Bureau tells us for every person that is not counted, it's a loss to the local municipalities, including the county, of approximately $2,500 a year. So just 400 people not getting counted is the loss to the local municipalities of $1 million a year. Now, in 2010, we weren't worried about getting people counted for the census. It was the normal everyday business. It wasn't until after the results came out that we were, wow, something's wrong with some of these numbers, particularly in some of our smaller villages. And that's what made us say we couldn't let that opportunity pass us by. The village of Portchester, the village of Ossining, they've been living likely with undercounted numbers by the thousands for the last 10 years. And think about your sales tax distribution is based on the 2010 census numbers. All right, so the 2020 numbers you will be living with for the next 10 years. It's going to be very important for you to make sure that you get an accurate count. So what's new with Census 2020? This will be the first census where people will have the opportunity to respond online. In fact, most people in this country are not going to get a paper survey. They're not going to get paper. You will have the opportunity to respond on your smartphone, on a laptop, on your internet at home if you have internet at home, and again, that's one of our concerns. But also you'll have the opportunity to call the Census Bureau and actually respond to the census by calling them and just providing your information to them. The advantage of doing it online is the data is going to be available to us much quicker. In fact, starting March 20th, we're going to have the opportunity to see the response rates in each of the census tracts in Westchester. So we'll be able to see ahead of time if there's an issue in particular areas of the county where we're not getting a good count. This is also a census where the census employees will have the opportunity to talk to building managers and to neighbors to ask how many people live in that housing unit if they can't get any response to knocking on the door. All right, and the Census Bureau will have the opportunity to get data from local other governments, federal governments, post office being one of them, HUD, the VA services, about how many people live in housing units, whatever data they may have. But I want to be very clear, the Census Bureau cannot share their data with any other government agency. All right, so the data is confidential. Census 2020 is the only 100% count of the population. Notice I did not say citizens. It is a 100% count of the population. We are trying to count everybody who is residing or living in the United States. It is not a count of just citizenship. It never has been. All right. It's also a count, by the way, of housing units and their vacancy rate. We are trying to get an understanding, the Census Bureau is trying to get an understanding of how many units are vacant. So there are only 9 questions that you're going to be asked to respond to under Census 2020. What's your name? How old are you? Where do you live? Do you rent or own your unit? What's your age, your sex, your ethnicity? And then for people beyond the first person, you will be asked, what is your relationship to the first person who responded to the census? And so even not related is going to be one of the answers, but spouse, child, aunt, uncle, grandmother, whatever it might be. There's going to be many, many different options because they understand that families come in all different shapes and sizes these days, and households. However, while Census 2020 is also being conducted, we need to let people know that the American Community Survey is also continuing to be conducted. And so ACS, or the American Community Survey, is where they survey about 300,000 households every month, and then they aggregate that data up and average it out and release it in 5-year increments. So it's not nearly as accurate as the census data itself, but they will be conducting that survey. So 300,000 households across this country will also be getting the census, the ACS surveys at the same time that they are going to be getting the Census 2020 surveys. Many people get confused. I'd like to help you understand all of this by explaining to you I have 4 children, and I can't count any of my 4 children. My son and his wife live upstate New York. They'll find they live in a private housing unit. They'll complete the census for themselves. But my 3 daughters are all students, okay? I have twin daughters who are 26, both of them in graduate school. One of them is up in Boston. And she called me the other day, or last week, and she said, Mom, I got the census. And I said, no, you didn't. And she said, yeah, I did. I really got the census. And I said, no, you didn't. Apparently, a pile of mail in her house finally fell off the table because young people don't look at mail, I've learned. And so she, in going through, picking up the mail, she saw an envelope from the census. She got an American Community Survey. Okay? So she got the ACS survey, which is like 60 questions. It's not just 9. But as a grad school student, she lives in a 3-bedroom apartment with 2 other grad school students. They are not related to each other. And so one of the worries that I had for her earlier late last year when we had a discussion about it was making sure that one of them actually got that survey and filled it out. Because again, young people don't look at their mail. I do have to tell you, her twin sister, again, 26, she's out at the University of Utah, was home around Thanksgiving time and asked, was I going to be home the next night? And I said, no, I have to go do a census presentation in Portchester. And my 26-year-old daughter said, what's a census? Think about it. 10 years ago, she was 16. She didn't have to worry about completing a census. All right? There's a big, not only are we worried about senior citizens and the fact that they have to fill out this census electronically, but we're worried about young people, okay? Young adults who may not have been taught in school that they have a responsibility to complete the census. We're worried about children under 5. The Census Bureau tells us that children under 5 are one of the most undercounted groups. We think it's because mom and dad think, well, they're not in school yet. They don't matter. They do matter because we all know you can't build onto a school overnight. You don't close down a school overnight. You look at the projections for the next couple of years. And so based on birth data, we know that children under 5 were in fact undercounted. We're also worried about the undocumented and people who don't necessarily speak English well or limited English proficient. The Census Bureau has thought of that angle, and because they have not only are materials and applications available in 12 languages, but they actually have technical support available in 59 languages. So they have certainly thought of that. But again, there are all sorts of things that we don't necessarily think about in the everyday world that we live in as we try to prepare people and everyone for the census coming. So I do like to start with a little bit of census geography to help people understand confidentiality and the nature of their data. So we start in the middle of the screen with a census block. If I were to leave City Hall here, go down to Columbus Avenue, make the right, go around to the next block, make a right, eventually I would arrive back at City Hall's front door here. That is a city block. That's a block. That is the lowest level of census geography, and the Census Bureau rarely releases data down at that level. Certainly no names, no nothing. And so, but the person, using my example in the middle of the screen, the person who lives across from me on Glen Ridge Road actually lives in another block. In fact, using my example down to the block group on the bottom, that person ends up in another block group. So it's impossible for any one household to be able their data to be determined where it is. Because a block group can have anywhere between 600 and 3,000 people with an optimum size of about 1,200. But the next level of geography, many block groups make up our census tracts. That's the census geography most people are familiar with. And so census tracts will have anywhere between 1,200 and 8,000 people. All right, with an optimum size of about 4,000. We have approximately 200 census tracts in Westchester County. Okay, but again, the census geography itself helps to understand the confidential nature of data. So local update of census addresses is my #1 reason why I am getting out to all the municipalities and helping you understand why we're concerned about data. During the summer of 2018, the Planning Department, we are a census affiliate, so we do work behind the scenes with the Census Bureau, helping them prepare for the next census. And then all throughout the 10 years, we work using that census data and help them to help other agencies understand how to use it. At the end of the summer of 2018, my staff had found a total of 370,000 housing units in Westchester County. Officially, in the housing needs assessment that the county executive just released a couple months ago, officially there are 345,885 housing units. We found the addresses for 24,000 housing units more than officially exist. Now that made us say, wow, something's wrong. And so we did in fact do a review and find that there were 7 municipalities in Westchester, Tuckahoe not being one of them, who were not reporting their monthly building permit surveys. All right, and many of them had not been doing it for many, many years. So 2 of our large cities, 2 of our large villages, 2 of our large towns were not reporting. And so Westchester's housing stock has been undercounted for many, many years. And so that did not help us get ready for this census. So we have now found those housing units. We don't care whether they're legal or not. I'm going to go back to that story about my daughter from Utah when she was home. So I had explained to her about the census, what it is, and you're going to get a letter in the mail. And she says, what if I don't get mail? And I was like, what, And then I said, well, if you have a TV, they're going to see the satellite dish. She goes, Mom, we don't watch TV. I should know. I'm so out of touch sometimes. I come to find out that my 26-year-old daughter in Utah, not in Westchester, in Utah, is living in an illegal housing apartment. She lives in the basement of somebody's house. But apparently it has a great yard for her dog, okay? What's on the minds of young people is not necessarily what we all think about, okay? So a friend of hers who created this opportunity for her to live in her basement. She doesn't get her own mail. Her landlord gets her mail and passes it on to her. That's the important point of raising that story is that at the Census Bureau, they do not care if the housing is legal or not. They are just trying to get a count of people. All right, so because my employees are also sworn under Title 13 of the U.S. Code, I am not allowed to share with the local municipality the addresses of all of those apartments that we found in each of the municipalities, okay? Same as as I keep trying to tell people, the data is confidential. We are under that same level of confidentiality. I can't even share it with the municipalities who are our partners in this. All right, so again, it's just helping you understand, but this is the number one reason. There's more. So another thing that we do behind the scenes is the boundary and annexation survey data. On the example, and I apologize, it's not the greatest thing to be able to see, but on the left is the city of New Rochelle, in the middle is the town of Mamaroneck, and on the right is the village of Larchmont. The blue line is the boundary line for each of these municipalities that the Census Bureau had on record. The white line is the real boundary line. So again, this is one of those things that we do behind the scenes because we certainly want to make sure Larchmont's already small enough as it is. We want to make sure that Larchmont gets credit for every housing unit that truly belongs in that little village. And then, and Mamaroneck and New Rochelle as well. So where we are on the timeline, 2020 census the Census Bureau began working on this in 2011. It takes a lot of years to be able to get this technology up and going. We certainly learned from the Obamacare sign-on that you can't let everybody sign on at the same time. So there's going to be a couple tranches of mail that will go out, and we'll get to that in one second. But the census itself, the Census Bureau has actually started counting people. The census director was up in Alaska in January and counted the first people up in that little village up in Alaska. I'm thankful I'm not that Census Bureau employee that had to go to Alaska in January. But anyway, they have started counting people. In Westchester, they will start to count people this month in February. And I've told you about 3 of my kids. My 4th daughter is a college student in Washington, D.C. She lives in a dorm. She lives in a group quarters. The Census Bureau is going to start counting group quarters this month. We have dorms here in Westchester. All right, and so students who live in college dorms, where they lay their head on April 1st will be counted in the dorms that they live in. They are not counted in our residences at home. So again, 4 children, and I can't count any of them, okay? But it's important for our families here to know that if they have college students that are away, that they get counted. If they live in dorms, they get counted in the dorm. If they live in private housing, these young people must be responsible for counting themselves. Okay, one of the good news one of the good things we found out about college students is Westchester and New York State as a whole actually benefits from the population of college students that come in. International students come in more to New York than our students that actually go out to school in other places. So we actually benefit from a school population as opposed to thinking that we are losing one. All right. The census itself, people will have until July 31st to be able to respond. July 31st, they actually close down the electronic system because by the Constitution, the Census Bureau must deliver to the President of the United States on December 31st the official count of the country. So 95% of the households in this country will get a letter delivered to them with a 12-digit code. It's an invitation to respond to the census. And you're going to take that 12-digit code because it is unique to your housing unit. You will take that code and fill it in on one of the first screens when you go online. Or if you're calling the Census Bureau, you can give them that number. And that will tell them which housing unit you are living in. If you get an email, if you get a telephone call, if you get a letter addressed to other than resident or household, it is not a real census letter. The Census Bureau doesn't know who you are. They don't know who lives at what housing unit right now. They don't have your email address because they don't have your name. So if anybody gets any material other than a letter from Jeffersonville, Indiana that says addressed to resident or household, it is likely not the real census. Okay, that's one of the important things for people to know. 5% of the population are going to get what they call stop and drop. And there are some actually here in Westchester County. If people do not have a mailbox in the front of their home, okay, or in their building, if it's an apartment building, and it happens in northern Westchester, okay, if they don't have a mailbox in the front of their home, they go to the post office to get their mail. A Census Bureau worker will actually come and visit their home and either collect their census information right then and there, or they will actually drop the paper survey off with them to respond. And then 1% are those people who live in the most remote areas of the country where there's no internet service, where there is likely no reliable post office service, and that's where the census employees will actually have to go and find them in the woods. So on or about March 12th, the first mailing with your census invitation will be sent out, which means on or about March 15th, March 16th, people will start to get these letters. In fact, by April 1st, some people will have gotten 3 letters from the Census Bureau. Okay, then that's why it's important that we're out now letting people know to expect this. One of the things you'll see a little bit later is I have the hard-to-count areas from our 2010 census, and most of the hard-to-count areas are in fact areas that had multifamily buildings. So one of the things we're trying to do is get to these multifamily building owners and make sure they post some kind of flyer up at the mailboxes to let people to know to watch for this mail. All right, City of Mount Vernon had one of the worst response rates in this county. So we need to be sure that all of their multifamily buildings, that they have some kind of notice up to let them know that it's coming. So you'll get a letter on or about, like we said, March 15th. On March 16th, a second letter will go out if you haven't responded right away. On March 26th, a postcard will go out. Again, it's not going to have your code on it because it's not going to be in a sealed envelope. So for people, they really have to watch for that first letter that will have that code. If you do not get a letter, if you do not get a code, you can still go online and complete the census. You're just going to actually give the cross streets of where your housing unit is as well as your address. So you'll just have to answer an extra question or two to be able to help the Census Bureau identify exactly where your housing unit is. In fact, what we're telling people, if they live with unrelated people, they may want to go online and do their own census if they're not sure if somebody else did it. Like my daughter in Boston, if one of the other girls gets the mail and did it just for herself and didn't report on the other 2, they can still go online and report for them. All right, and then April 8th, there will be the 4th mailing, and that's the first time. If you have not responded by then, that's when the Census Bureau will actually send you the paper form. But again, they're hoping not too many people will wait for the census. We do expect a number of senior citizens will wait for a paper form because they just may not necessarily know what to do before that. Pretty much if you have not responded by April 20th or so, then very likely somebody from the Census Bureau will be knocking on your door and coming to try to take your census verbally. So the one thing to tell people, if they don't want somebody knocking on their door, And senior citizens have been told, don't answer your door if somebody comes knocking. So if they come knocking on, if you don't want them knocking on your door, the best thing, honestly, to do is to respond to the census, okay? Now, I told you number one reason was the LUCA, the addresses. This is number two reason why I'm really concerned about a census response. So in 2018, the Census Bureau did the CBAM survey. This is the Census Barriers, Attitudes, and Motivators Survey. They sent out 50,000 invitations to, again, respond about the census and just people's attitudes about the census. 17,500 people across the country took the time to respond. They did the same survey in 2008. In 2008, of the people who took the time to respond, 14% of the people who responded said they're not going to respond to the census. 14%. In reality, that response rate was only 76%. So 10% more did not, in fact, respond to the census. Okay, in 2018, they asked the same question. 33% of the people who took the time to respond to this survey said they were not going to respond to the census. If we add another 10% onto that, that means 4 out of every 10 people in this country, 4 out of every 10 people in this county will not be counted. Again, major cause for concern, okay, because these are people who took the time to respond to the survey. One of the questions they were asked was, how familiar are you with the census? Only 79% of the people who responded said that they were at all familiar with the census. Some of them are like my 26-year-old, what's a census, okay? Others, I'm sure, are people who've moved to this country or are visiting this country. And so there are people who are living here who must respond to the census who are not familiar with it. They were asked, why will you not respond to the census? They don't care, concerns about data confidentiality and privacy, fear of repercussion, they don't trust the government, and frankly, what's in it for me? But they were also asked, what would motivate you to respond to the census? And this is quite interesting. 94% said if it meant more money for their fire departments and for hospitals and healthcare, that would motivate them to respond. 85% said if it meant more money for schools, that would motivate them to respond. And 92% said if it meant fixing the potholes outside were going to get fixed, that would encourage them to respond. So again, this helps us to make sure people know that census does in fact tie to money that comes to the local municipalities and to the county that helps us fix our roads and provide healthcare services. So I said earlier that the national response rate was 76%. In Westchester, it was worse. Westchester's response rate was actually only 73%. The other 26%, 27% actually were people where they only responded when the census workers came knocking on their doors, okay? And so we have hard-to-count areas all over this county. Anywhere on that map that has color on it is an area from the 2010 census that was identified as a hard-to-count area. The darker the color, the lower the response rate. In fact, the bright red areas are areas that had less than a 50% response rate. So the city of Mount Vernon, the village of Elmsford, the village of Portchester, all more than 50% of those communities are colored. So again, those are areas we are extremely concerned about their ability to be counted. Southern Westchester as a whole, though, did not do great. In fact, in April, May of last year, the Rockefeller Institute of Policy came out with their 500 census tracts across New York State. Remember I told you we have 200 census tracts just in Westchester. So including New York City, the 500 most difficult census tracts in the entire state to count, and Westchester County had their #1 on the list. It's in the city of Yonkers. So again, even based on an algorithm for this census, the Rockefeller Institute is already saying Westchester County is going to have a problem getting our count out, particularly in the city of Mount Vernon again as well. So in April 1st of last year, the county executive did establish a complete count committee. It has been actively meeting every single month since then. We did reconnaissance on all those hard to count areas. We've been working on a whole host of promotional materials and advertising. We've now got billboards up. We've now got bus ads running on the bus lines. We've got bus ads on the shelters. We're doing a whole bunch of other things. We did a kickoff at Pace University 2 weeks ago. And so, we're actually getting a bunch of, we printed bookmarks because, again, children under 5, we're going to deliver them to the children's rooms at the libraries and to the schools. We're going to have reusable shopping bags that we can give out at the farmers markets that we're going to be able to give to all the local municipalities. So, again, the word gets out. People start to see this logo over and over and over again. So we really need to encourage our municipalities to work with us. As we get the data in, starting on March 20th, we're going to need somebody, I'm presuming it's going to be David, but we're going to need somebody we can call who can help us when we say, tell us something about what's in this area, because we want to tell the Census Bureau who are the most culturally or it's language, whatever the issues are, who would be the most sensitive people to be able to go into those communities and help us get the best count that we possibly can. All right, so it's going to be a challenge to make sure we get an accurate count, but again, the more awareness we raise ahead of time, frankly, it's to the good of all of us. And thank you very much.